Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we are covering the latest on the Genius Act, the crisis in the Middle East going on, the Trump Media ETF filing, AI, energy, and the Bitcoin Policy Summit coming up, and more. Remember, follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Follow the pod on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. So, Zach, let's jump right in. We got a lot to talk.
We do, and it's great to be back with you. And so a lot happening in the news this week. So after recently announcing that it would purchase $2.5 billion in Bitcoin, news broke earlier this week that Trump Media has filed an ETF with the SEC, that's a lot of acronyms, called the Truth, Social, Bitcoin, and Ethereum ETF. It will hold Bitcoin in a 3-to-1 ratio with Ethereum, and it will adjust that ratio quarterly. So, Brian, a couple of questions. You can take this whatever direction you want. What is an ETF? How does it differ from actual Bitcoin? And what is the significance of this latest move by Trump Media?
Yeah, so an exchange-traded fund, there are a number of Bitcoin ETFs out there. It allows, frankly, older investors, people who are more comfortable with the legacy financial system, to hold a product that tracks the price of these digital assets without actually owning the asset, not holding their keys. Of course, the Bitcoiners would say not your keys, not your coins. But I understand there's a lot of people who are more comfortable being able to call up their broker and say, I want some exposure to Bitcoin, get me some of that. I think the issue with ETFs, and I will say in some of my accounts, my guy has me with some Bitcoin ETFs. So I don't want to be accused of being a hypocrite. I also own, Bitcoin myself, but the issue with those is they've done, I think, well at tracking the price of Bitcoin, but you're not holding it yourself, and you're paying somebody fees. You don't need to do that, So it sort of is just a very thin, wet blanket, I think, on the benefits that Bitcoin offers with the fees, and then of course, you're not holding your own Bitcoin. You're not a sovereign individual, if you will. So those are kind of the drawbacks, but a lot of people like them, obviously, for the ease of use. I think I have no issue with the Trump media, issuing an ETF. I don't think it's, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's that wise an investment to include Ethereum, because I've been tracking, particularly on X, a lot of people will show the Bitcoin ETH kind of spread, and it's been widening. And Bitcoiners will tell you, there's a hard supply cap on Bitcoin. It's the only one that's truly decentralized. The Ethereum Foundation has a lot of kind of control over the supply and dynamics of the ETH network, and Bitcoin has done much better compared to ETH. So I think the Bitcoiners would tell you that this is kind of watering it down. So adding to those two, whatever you want to call it, threads I was just pulling on, not your keys, not your coins, and then paying fees, then you're kind of diluting the Bitcoin with ETH, which Bitcoiners would tell you is an inferior savings instrument. So for that reason, I don't think it's the best way to do it as an investment product, but that's my personal opinion. And there are a lot of ETH enthusiasts out there. And so I think they're trying to find investors who want exposure to digital assets, but somewhat diversified. And there are probably investors out there, who will see the value in this. I think the longer term performance compared to just Bitcoin, again, Brian's opinion, it's probably not going to give returns as good as just Bitcoin. So for that reason, it's not a product that I personally would buy, but again, I'm sure there are investors out there who want exposure to digital assets and they want some diversity in there. So I understand why they're offering it. notwithstanding the drawbacks that I've just walked through. But the significance is, another entrant into the market, another institutional purchaser of Bitcoin. The supply is staying capped. So that means more demand, static supply, price goes up. So generally, basically good for the Bitcoin ecosystem. I don't know that that is a particular investment product that I would put in my portfolio, but I'm sure there are others with a different investment strategy who would. So that's my take on it.
No, that's a great take. And kind of along those same lines, there was also news this week that Michael Saylor's strategy purchased another 1.05 billion. And we want to make sure we get that 05 in there because that's half a Bitcoin. But 1.05 billion in Bitcoin. And then over on Anthony Pompliano's Substack, he wrote about a very interesting story I found. Altcoin founders are dumping their coins and buying Bitcoin. So I think this kind of goes into that last point you made. But if people that are, started their own altcoin companies, they're dumping it and buying Bitcoin. I think this kind of goes into that last point you made. But what does all of that say about the value of Bitcoin versus other cryptocurrencies, altcoins, ETF, and the like?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is the OG and it is still the dominant force in the market for a reason. I mean, I think it's the best product in this space. And so it makes sense that people have experimented. They've tried to challenge Bitcoin. There have been hundreds or thousands of challengers, maybe millions, I don't know. And none of them have really held a candle to it. So finally, I think some of the altcoin founders are bending the knee and just surrendering to Bitcoin. That's not that surprising to me, but it is interesting. There are, some of these other networks are more useful for other things, smart contracts and the like, building upon them rather than the underlying product. The issue with that is a lot of them are then somewhat dependent upon the price of the underlying asset for the revenues that they're going to generate with whatever those products are. That is a risk. I mean, you think Bitcoin is volatile. Look at altcoins. I mean, it's a casino. So, I think it may be a little overdue, frankly, that some of the altcoiners are finally just throwing it all into Bitcoin. At the very least, diversifying into Bitcoin and stop trying to challenge it so much because it really is unique. Supply capped and truly decentralized. It's the best product. So I've also found that take from Pomp extremely interesting. And I think the thing that surprised me most about it, again, is that it took so long for this to happen. But it's happening. Here we are.
Yes. Well, on a serious note, we'll shift over to another topic. We've got international conflict back in the news. Hostilities are escalating between Israel and Iran. Each side is trading missiles. At least initially, it seems like Israel's had sort of a tactical advantage in the element of surprise. World leaders at the G7 were set to weigh in before President Trump whisked off to the White House to meet with his advisors. Oil prices started to rise and then they dipped a bit. Gold was up slightly. Bitcoin was down slightly over the last few days. The stock market, which sort of traditionally gets spooked by these things, it held pat. On Monday, it was up on news that Iran wanted to end hostilities. But again, some fluctuation there. According to Kathleen Brooks, who's a research director for the foreign exchange broker XTB. This is a quote from her. The situation in the Middle East would need to deteriorate rapidly and enter into a more dangerous phase for Bitcoin to fall below 100,000. So, Brian, this is just one snapshot of the impact of a significant Middle Eastern and international crisis and the impact it can have on markets. And a lot can change, in the coming days and weeks. But what would you anticipate the impact of this crisis to be on markets generally and on Bitcoin specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Bitcoin throughout its history has traded sort of as a risk on asset and tracked sort of when markets rise, Bitcoin has risen sometimes faster. When markets fall, Bitcoin has fallen sometimes faster. I think the Bitcoin market is maturing to the point that it's people are seeing its value as sort of a risk off asset. Again, because of the market dynamics, because it's supply capped and demand keeps rising. And it's maturing. There's more liquidity in it. There's more participants in it. There's more institutions in it. I think you're seeing that kind of stabilization of the market, of the Bitcoin market, that has been now 15 years in the making. That people are seeing it as a flight to quality rather than a risk on asset that is more akin to gambling. So I think that market maturity for Bitcoin is what stands out kind of the most to me. Markets in general, I think, are the price of oil is typically a big factor when there are conflicts in the Middle East. President Trump, of course, is trying to take some of the risk out of that by having the U.S. return to energy self-sufficiency and being a net exporter of energy and having more diverse sources of it for the world, so that conflicts in the Middle East don't necessarily have that effect of the price of energy goes up and then the price of everything else goes up, and then you have a lot of downstream economic effects. I think we're having some of those risks removed from the market with the maturity of the Bitcoin market, and then the U.S. becoming again a net exporter and being self-sufficient on oil. So those are the things that pop out to me on this. In terms of the actual conflict, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and in fact, strategic uncertainty. The president doesn't want our adversaries to know what he's going to do next. Suffice it to say, I don't think he wants a protracted war. So I think that's probably why the market's reaction has been somewhat muted. He has his very specific stated goal of ending Iran's nuclear ambitions, but without nation building. That's a very thin needle to thread. That is really walking across a tightrope, but that is the president's, I think, stated posture, goal, desire. And I think so far markets are believing him that he's in a position to achieve that. So that's a lot to unpack there, but that's my stream of consciousness reaction to your very, very good questions.
Iran's nuclear ambitions have been known for a long time, and this, I go back all the way to my days on the Hill, which was a decade ago, and they were debating the Iran nuclear deal, and it was interesting how all that played out. And the one thing that sticks out to me most is they voted on this. They had both chambers vote on this agreement, and Tom Cotton, I think, was the only person in the entire Congress, and I'll say including the member that I worked for, that got this right. He voted against it. And his argument was it should have been, presented as a treaty rather than a bicameral thing. And I'll always remember that he stood and said this is one, not good policy, but two, we're not doing it the right process. Regardless, for over a decade and beyond, we've known about the nuclear, ambitions of Iran, but it is interesting to see how, as surprising as all of this is, and as things escalate, how things kind of, they seem to be holding steady. So things can change, but we'll keep watching and more importantly, praying that folks stay safe. We'll pivot again to another topic. We'll switch back to something that seems like it's a regular segment on this show almost every week, the drama of the Genius Act. And hopefully we can talk about it less now, because the Senate finally passed it 68-30 on June 17th, so just a couple days ago. The Senate has prioritized stablecoins before moving on to market structure, which we hear is in the works. The House has kind of hurried up, waited, hurried again on stablecoins and market structure, possibly even joining the two together. So, Brian, hopefully, maybe for the last time, it won't be the last time we talk about it, but how do you see stablecoins and market structure playing out over the next few months?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the current bicameral dispute is that the House, because they've done so much work on market structure and they even passed the Fit 21 legislation last Congress, they see the Senate as kind of catching up to them. And so now they want to attach market structure to stable coins and send it back to the Senate and kind of jam them into doing something quickly. The president has posted a truth on Truth Social where he basically scolded in without calling them out specifically in a negative way, really. But he kind of staked out his position that the House shouldn't do that. They shouldn't load up the Genius Act. They should just pass the Genius Act, get a win on the board so that there is stablecoin legislation, and then jump on market structure and hash that out. I think there's probably a lot of lessons learned between the two chambers on how the stablecoin bill has come together. Of course, the House version of it is the Stable Act, and the Senate version is the Genius Act. Stable Genius, of course, was a very hilarious Trump tweet from years ago. So the president's position is, look, we've got a win through the Senate on a strong bipartisan vote. Just send it through the House and let's get the stable legislation in place and then go to market structure. The House, I think their legitimate concern here is that, we get that win, and then what if there isn't enough momentum to really tackle the bigger issue of the market structure? So wanting to make sure that actually is able to move. So I understand why the House, members of the House are taking that position. I also completely understand the president's position that a win's a win. Let's get the win. We can get two wins. So let's get this one first, and then we'll get win number two. It's a perfectly, reasonable position, I think, on either end of it. We'll see what happens. It would be nice to get a win and then get all these members on record voting for it. It's then going to be, I think, a little bit more challenging for them to stand in the way of market structure, because you'll have all those tea leaves through the stablecoin vote that most of which are probably going to translate to a market structure vote. So I come a little bit down on the side of the president's position, I think, which is also Senator Haggerty's position, who really was a driving force behind the Genius Act. So I come down a little bit on their side of the coin. Let's get a win on the board and then revisit for market structure. But that's honestly the main debate. Now, there are policy issues that need to be hashed out for market structure, but the main issue so far is just, do you do stables and then market structure, or do you lump them together? I don't think the House trying to jam the Senate on market structure is actually going to bring the Senate along. I think that could just turn this into a bit of a more protracted process. So I don't know. Again, stream of consciousness. There's a lot to unpack with that question. So that's how I think about it.
In my experience, at least in the state legislature, the House trying to force us in the Senate to do anything or jam anything, let's say, down our throats, didn't work. And it usually caused the opposite reaction. So we'll see what happens here. For our next segment, I found a really interesting chart from Bank of America Global Research. It plotted major technological disruptions over the last 1,000 years. And frankly, it was really the first one they highlighted was the printing press. But you'll notice as the graph, kind of swoops up there almost exponentially with population, you'll notice the concentration in the last 50 years or so of these major, just transformational innovations. And of note, Bank of America highlights Bitcoin, AI, and quantum computing. They're all on the list. So, Brian, Riot is a traditional Bitcoin mining company, but we're also looking to expand into the AI and high performance computing space. And this graphic, I think, validates that Riot is at the tip of the spear on this. So can you talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why things like Bitcoin, AI, energy, high performance computing are so critically intertwined?
Yeah. So the next major phase of economic growth, I think, has to do with the efficiency of holding and transferring value and information. So the internet democratized information, made it more widely available, made created efficiencies that generated tremendous growth. Now AI is going to improve on that dramatically for access to information, and I've seen various estimates out there um, estimating a worker productivity per capita GDP improvement of like 40%. Um, and that's from various sources. That seems to be where analysts tend to be landing. If you believe that the AI's improvement of the delivery of information is going to create that much more efficiency, that's going to be tremendous growth. And then Bitcoin has been doing a number of things, but making people more sovereign individuals able to hold value without intermediaries, governments, or banks. It is, as we've said numerous times on this show just today, it's supply capped and then demand is going through the roof. So that is a recipe for growth, for price appreciation. So if you consider that Bitcoin and AI in particular are going to be two huge drivers of quality of life improvement, frankly. GDP sounds wonky, but it really is. It's a reflection of the improvement of quality of life. I think these two technologies are really, really critically important. And two of the biggest inputs, or the biggest input into both of these technologies, is energy. And Bitcoin's been an incredible network and asset for monetizing, capturing, and creating value from energy that has been underutilized or stranded, because the Bitcoin network is decentralized. Miners can mine when energy is cheap and abundant and it's not being used in a particular area at a particular time of day, whatever it may be. But then it can make power available to a grid when people need it, if it's very hot or very cold outside, etc. So the way I see it, and we can get into this in more detail, I think we're going to talk about this summit that's coming up. But it's really this kind of convergence of the improvement, the efficiencies created in the way people hold and transmit value and the way people are accessing information. The country who has the best, most welcoming business environment for these technologies is going to capture the next phase of international growth per capita. Their quality of life is going to be better. They're going to have a stronger economy. They'll be able to have a stronger military. This is a path to superpower status, or maintaining superpower status for the US. So that's the initial take on it, but we can get into a little more detail on that.
And it's important too that as businesses, as policymakers, educational institutions get ahead of this and recognize what's coming, and be prepared that we're training what our my governor back in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, called a future ready workforce. And so there's a lot of exciting things ahead. Well, as you mentioned, for our next segment, as you mentioned, next week is the third annual Bitcoin Policy Summit hosted by our friends at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I look forward to joining you in DC, and I'll make sure to bring my passport so they let a Texan in. But the speaker list is jam-packed. You have CIA Deputy Director Michael Ellis, Bo Hines from the White House, Senators Cynthia Lummis, Marsha Blackburn, and Jim Justice, House Whip Tom Emmer, folks from the SEC, dozens of people from Bitcoin, tech companies, entrepreneurs, academics, journalists, human rights human rights folks, activists, and more. It should be a great conference. And Brian, there's a lot of these conferences out there. You just got back from one in Las Vegas, but what is the Bitcoin Policy Summit and why is it such an important event in the policy space?
Yeah, so the Bitcoin Policy Institute is a 501c3 dedicated to educating people about the intersection of Bitcoin and public policy. And I would say they're kind of the leading think tank in terms of coming up with ideas for, what is the US doing wrong? Where can they improve? Where can they innovate and kind of lead the world in the way policy outcomes are facilitating or blocking this kind of economy of the future. And they've gained quite a bit of credibility, I think, by putting on very useful and educational conferences and also putting out really smart, innovative policy proposals. In fact, they're even cited by the vice president, J.D. Vance, at the Bitcoin conference, who said, I know Bitcoin Policy Institute's working on some of these issues and, we invite your input. So they've really established themselves as a leader. And the guys who founded it, Grant and David, are wonderful friends, great guys. They're very young, wise, well beyond their years. They're incredibly professional and smart about the way they approach a number of issues. They've been particularly helpful in advancing Bitcoin strategic reserves and why those are necessary for any serious sovereign that wants to kind of right the wrongs of the way currencies have been treated in recent decades. So they're really doing great stuff, and the speakers at their summit are always top notch. And you can see, they've got a commissioner of the SEC, they have multiple senators, House leadership, the White House attending, even the CIA. So I'm sure some Bitcoin conspiracy nerds will say this is total validation that the CIA created Bitcoin. I don't think that's the case. I am looking forward to seeing what Michael Ellis has to say. He's a smart guy. He worked in the first Trump administration, I know, at the National Security Council. Now he's obviously in this leadership position at the CIA. I'll be very curious to hear what he has to say. He also worked for Rumble and was the general counsel there, which now has a Bitcoin treasury. Of course, he's not there anymore, but in the intervening months, they've developed their own Bitcoin treasury. So it's going to be just a room full of luminaries, and they've really adopted an interesting format now. There'll be some panels and stuff. They'll go through different topics of, Bitcoin and the energy grid and what's happening with Bitcoin and AI and, what are the wins we've achieved so far, ending Operation Choke Point, things like that, fostering the growth of the industry in the United States, how to help keep it growing. What are the new market developments and new products being offered kind of based on Bitcoin? We'll learn a ton. And the format's going to be great because they've made everything tight. So you and I have talked about the TLDR or the bluff, the bottom line up front, don't bury the lead, get to the point. So the way they've organized this format is over the course of one day, it's like 20 or 30 different lightning presentations, really short, smart, just new ideas presented succinctly to make people think and then learn more and then hopefully put some meat on the bones in terms of really good policy ideas. It's going to be very stimulating, and we're going to hear from a lot of like I said, real luminaries. So should be interesting. I think they usually live stream at least some of it, and a lot of the content from these things go wild. Like hundreds of thousands or even millions of people end up viewing these conferences. They might not even know what conference it is when they're watching it, but it's, on social media, these tight clips that are really engaging get a ton of traction. So I think they've set it up in a way. That's why it's great to have younger, more innovative guys running a conference instead of old, stodgy, boring conferences where you just have a panel drag on forever. The way they've set this up is for maximum impact. So for that reason, we're glad to support their work and to participate in the conference. Should be a lot of fun. And I'm glad you're coming in for it.
I'm looking forward to it. DC has just a special place in my heart. It's where I met my wife. It's where our first child was born. So I'm looking forward to coming back and getting a reprieve from the Texas heat. So one of the luminaries, though, giving one of these lightning talks is you. So you've got 5-7 minutes or so on the stage. But what is your presentation going to be about?
Well, it's going to relate this growth in Bitcoin and AI that we just touched upon to superpower status, and about how over the course of history, there have been a number of superpowers. The Roman Empire, of course, the Mongolians, the Spanish. There have been a lot of sort of empires, really strong nations, all of whom have led for centuries and centuries. The U.S. has really been a superpower since like World War II-ish, give or take. You can argue maybe, they started to rise really with the Industrial Revolution. And of course, there are other key moments in our history: winning the revolution, the Revolutionary War, winning the Cold War. There have been a lot of key moments in innovation: the airplane, the internet. A lot of key moments that have led to the U.S. being a superpower. But in the grand scheme of history, we've only been a superpower for a very short amount of time. And every other superpower throughout history has collapsed at some point. So what could collapse the U.S. or what could preserve our status? And that's where I talk about the economic growth that's being ushered in by Bitcoin and AI, and how Riot's the tip of the spear. We're one of the key actors in this space. And if our politicians make wise decisions, we can help foster in the next golden age, to use the president's term, but really preserve America's superpower status. That's how important it is. And the key input is energy. So I'm going to talk about energy policy, data centers, the facilities required to operate the network of Bitcoin, and how to build the ecosystem of AI, and how it's not really an option. Like, we have to do this if we expect to stave off, other competitors, China first among them. There are other nations out there that don't want us to be a superpower anymore. They may want somebody else to be, or they may want to have an axis that becomes a challenging superpower. The U.S. can advance the values of freedom, individual empowerment, economic growth, better quality of life, if we're smart on Bitcoin and AI. So that explanation of what my talk is probably even longer than the talk. But those are the themes that I'll hit on. I'll just get a little bit more specific with some awesome slides that our colleague Evelyn helped me create. And you helped me create this whole presentation and idea to begin with. So I hope I do it justice. I hope I live up to and earn the good faith that you and our colleagues have put in me to do this. But I think it's an important message to hear, and hopefully it will get a lot of traction and people will see it, and it'll make them think, and it'll make our policymakers, want to row in the right direction in terms of helping the country succeed, helping companies like ours succeed. Because if they do, we have a very bright future. I want it to be optimistic. But I want to kind of light a fire under people's butts and realize the urgency that we're faced with right now. So it should be fun. It'll be more fun and interesting than my description of it, I think. We'll see.
I think it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it, and I think it goes to the organizers of it. Is it's not going to be stodgy 3-hour panels. You're gonna hear a lot of perspectives. You're gonna hear from policymakers. You're gonna hear from folks in industry. You're gonna hear from disruptors, and I think that's the exciting thing. And so this is gonna just fit in perfectly with what I think the goals of the summit are. So I'm looking forward to it. Well, for our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And I'm going to go back to the well that is the wonderful world of Formula One racing, because there's a lot of exciting things happening this year. So it was a wild race in Montreal, as has been predicted by the pundits and the drivers themselves. The two McLaren drivers crashed into each other. Oscar Piastri missed out on a 9th straight podium, but he stretched out his lead in the Drivers' Championship over Lando Norris, his teammate, who crashed out of the race when they hit each other. But my big takeaway from that race is 18-year-old Kimi Antonelli, who drives for Mercedes. He became the 3rd youngest podium finisher ever, behind Max Verstappen, probably the greatest driver of all time, and Lance Stroll. He made an incredible overtake on the first lap. He led the race for a while as the drivers ahead of him made early pit stops. Tires weren't working out for everybody. Overall, he drove a great race, sandwiched between Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri nearly the entire time. That's after an amazing 4th place finish in his first ever F1 race in the rain in Melbourne, Australia. And he seems like a really good kid. And I didn't know this. I learned this from one of the podcasts I listened to after the race. After the race, he flew back to Italy to take his high school finals. So just seems like a really good kid. So congratulations to Kimi Antonelli.
That's cool. That's very cool. So my grab bag is we finally have an American Pope, which I don't think many of us expected to happen when Pope Francis passed away. Pope Leo, now the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church and its billions of Catholics around the world. It's a stark reminder that popes are just like us. They're people too. They may be the successors to St. Peter, but they really are humans. And his family's from Chicago, and his brothers are now kind of famously hilarious. And there was a picture circulating of the Pope long before he was Pope, wearing a White Sox jersey, watching the White Sox in the World Series all the way back in 2005, 20 years ago. Now, fast forward 20 years, he's the Pope. And so there were some White Sox fans. Now, I'm a Yankee fan, not a White Sox fan, but this still was so endearing and hilarious to me. They were there in St. Peter's Square for one of those events where the Pope is in the Pope Mobile, riding through the crowd, blessing people, saying hello. And the White Sox fans started chanting, and the Pope joined in with a White Sox chant. So encourage everybody to check that out. Take a listen, and it's just so funny to see the Pope. He's just like us. He even put a post.
It's a great clip. Yeah. It's a great clip.
He even put a post out recently about how learning to lose is a valuable human life lesson, and it could not be more apropos for a White Sox fan because they're having a tough time right now. but maybe God is on their side. Who knows? So the Pope chanting for the White Sox in St. Peter's Square, hilarious, heartwarming,
fantastic.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, I think, pretty efficiently. That is going to be all for us this week. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. Follow us on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Follow me on X at MorgansternNJ. And we will see you next week for another episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.